On a dusty autumn evening, the city street slowly quieted down. Golden leaves fell from the trees, creating the sound of a rustling carpet. In the distance, above the city's horizon, the reddish sun slowly descended, giving the impression that the world was enveloped in enchanting orange light. At the edge of this peaceful city, in a small suburb, a group of friends gathered. The main character, Max, a young man with tousled hair and a light stubble on his face, stood beside Lisa, his courageous friend with dark curly hair. In front of them was Jake, a sturdy guy with a beard, and his girlfriend, Sarah, with short red hair. "Max, are you sure this is a good idea?" Lisa asked doubtfully, her blue eyes shimmering in the rays of the setting sun. Max grinned and shrugged. "Why not? Halloween, a cemetery, it's a pretty logical combination, don't you think?" Jake, who was armed with a flashlight, added, "And besides, it'll make a cool story to brag about to the others at school." Sarah looked at them, feeling a strange unease. "I hope we won't disturb someone's resting place there. The realm of the dead should remain peaceful." Max nodded, but his confidence awkwardly masked his nervousness. "We'll be careful, I promise. And we have flashlights, so there's nothing to fear." Gathering around the cemetery in trance, they laughed and joked, but deep inside, each of them felt the fear of what awaited them at this graveyard on Halloween night. Max, Lisa, Jake, and Sarah approached the iron gates of the cemetery with determination. The gates creaked as Max opened them, and the old hinges produced eerie squeaks. The light from their flashlights cast creepy shadows on the winding cemetery paths. The graves protruded from the ground like the teeth of a great old monster ready to swallow anyone who dared to disturb its peace. Leaves rustled underfoot, adding to the sense of solitude and abandonment. Max tried to sound confident as he said, "It's all good. Guys, just follow me." He turned on his flashlight and directed its beam towards the nearest grave. Names and dates were carved on it, a reminder of the people at rest here. Lisa bit her lip, feeling a chill run down her spine. "We won't forget that this place deserves respect and remembrance, right?" Jake nodded, and Sarah agreed, adding, "We're not here to disrupt the rest of the departed. Just exploring, nothing more." As a few minutes passed, the cemetery completely engulfed them. They walked past rows of old graves, but as they ventured deeper into the cemetery, their jokes and laughter gradually faded, and an ominous silence began to loom over them. The flashlights danced on the tombstones, casting flickering shadows, and every rustling of leaves created incredible discomfort. The group started to feel that the cemetery had a life of its own, and this life was far from the ordinary. Max continued to lead them deeper, hoping to find something interesting or something that would truly make them feel Halloween in all its eerie glory. The flashlight beams cast eerie shadows that danced on the old graves, resembling ghosts hiding in the darkness. The friends kept moving forward but halted several times, feeling like something was moving around them. At first, they attributed it to fear and nervousness, but the sounds became more distinct. They heard muffled moans, whispers, and rustling among the graves. "Do you hear that?" Lisa whispered, pausing and listening. Max slowly nodded. "Yeah, I hear something too. Maybe it's just the wind or animals." Jake, gripping his flashlight tightly, whispered, "Doesn't sound like the wind. Max, it's strange." Sarah looked around anxiously. "Maybe we should go back." But at that moment, as they turned around, the sounds grew louder and closer. Whispers and invisible hands seemed to hover in the air around them. The group of friends felt that something sinister and supernatural was closing in on them. Suddenly, from the darkness, the sound of footsteps emerged, but none of them could see where it was coming from. Shadows swayed, and the moans intensified. Max and his friends began to suffocate with fear, looking around for whatever or whoever was around them. The mysterious sounds became increasingly ominous, and the group realized they weren't alone in the cemetery, and Halloween night had brought something they hadn't expected. The sounds and ghostly whispers continued to envelop the group, penetrating their minds and inducing terror. They turned, trying to determine the source of this eerie symphony, but the darkness and shadows obstructed their vision. "Max, what's happening?" Lisa whispered, trembling with tension. Max, also experiencing fear, tried to remain calm. "I'm not sure, Lisa, but maybe we should move farther away from here." Jake and Sarah nodded in agreement, and they turned to head back to the cemetery gates. However, when they approached the gates, which had previously been open, they found them now locked. Panic seized them, and they began pounding and trying to open the gates, but they wouldn't budge. Sarah screamed when the ground vanished from beneath her. "Where is he?" Lisa exclaimed, trying to locate Jake, but Jake was gone. His flashlight lay on the ground, its light dimmed. The remaining friends desperately searched, but couldn't find any traces or signs of his disappearance. Max's heart pounded in his ears as he realized they had lost one of their friends in this dark place. They began to scour every corner of the cemetery, but Jake seemed lost in the darkness and shadows. Amidst the sounds of moans and the whispers of invisible shades, they felt that the cemetery had endowed them with an invisible nightmare from which escape wouldn't be so easy. The group of friends continued their desperate search for Jake in the darkness of the cemetery, but to no avail. Fear and panic gripped them with each passing second. The eerie sounds wouldn't cease, and the shadows surrounded them like living entities, ready to cause harm. "We can't stay here," Max said, his voice trembling with fear. "We need to try and find another way out. Somehow." Lisa shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "But how? The gates are locked, and we don't know where to go. We're trapped." Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm her fears. "Maybe we should go back to where we heard those strange sounds and whispers. Maybe there's a clue there about what's happening." Max agreed that it might be their only option. They headed back to the spot where the sounds had been most pronounced and began examining the nearby graves. As they approached one of the graves, they discovered strange messages and symbols drawn in blood on its surface. The symbols were cryptic, and the messages foretold something horrifying that was meant to happen. Suddenly, they realized they had become part of something much larger and more terrifying than they could have imagined. The group of friends began to meticulously explore the cemetery, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare. They walked along the pathways, illuminating tombstones and memorials with their flashlights, but found no visible doors or exits. From time to time, they heard the rustling of the wind, but it was the only sound that penetrated this gloomy world. After a while, Max noticed a peculiar phenomenon. They seemed to be walking the same path repeatedly. "Wait," he said, "it's like we're coming back to the same place again and again." Lisa and Sarah exchanged anxious glances, and Jake tried to focus on orienting himself. However, in reality, the place they were in looked the same regardless of the direction they chose. "This can't be," Jake said, his voice strained. "We have to find a way out of here." Every new turn, every alley seemed the same to them, and they felt like they were walking in circles. Fear and despair enveloped them like a strong gust of wind in the night. "We can't keep going like this," Max said, his voice sounding uncertain. "We need to try something else." Lisa squeezed his hand and tried to improve the situation. We need to stay calm and think. Maybe we should try sticking to one side and always turn left to find an exit. Sarah nodded and joined their plan. They began to move, always turning left, but soon they encountered a new problem wherever they walked. The same graves kept appearing, as if the cemetery was changing its structure before their eyes. Suddenly, as if he were a ghost, Jake disappeared before their eyes. He had been walking ahead, illuminating the way with his flashlight, and then his light went out. The friends stood in bewilderment, but as they approached the spot where Jake should have been, they found that he had vanished. "Jake, where are you?" Sarah cried, her voice sounding hysterical. Max and Lisa began to inspect the place of Jake's disappearance, but found no traces or any signs of his presence. Jake seemed to have dissolved into thin air. This second disappearance among them caused even greater terror and hopelessness. They realized that the cemetery was playing with them, manipulating their reality. With each passing minute, it became increasingly difficult to remain calm and hope for rescue. Following the steadfast rule of always turning left, the group of friends continued to explore the cemetery in search of Jake and a way to freedom. But every turn seemed endlessly repetitive, and their fear only intensified in the darkness. "We can't allow another disappearance," Lisa said with determination. "We must find Jake somehow." Max agreed, but his voice sounded weary. "We can't just keep going forward endlessly. We need to try something else." They decided to return to the place where Jake had disappeared most recently, hoping to find some trace or clue. However, when they approached that spot, they found that it had also changed, with no signs of Jake's disappearance. "Maybe we should go back to the door we came through," Sarah suggested. "Perhaps it will open, and we can find a way out." They decided to return to the beginning of their journey, to the door through which they had entered the cemetery. However, when they approached the door, they found that it was now locked with a bolt. The fear that had already engulfed them intensified. The group inspected the door, trying to find a way to open it, but the bolt was securely fastened. It was as if the cemetery did not want them to leave. At that moment, Max realized that they were surrounded by something they couldn't understand or control. They were trapped in the cemetery on this terrifying Halloween night, and they had to find a way to deal with this nightmare. The group of friends stood before the locked door, realizing that they would have to search for a way out within this mystical cemetery. Fear and despair weighed on them, and every moment spent here felt endless. "We can't stay here," Max said, his voice trembling. "We need to find a way out, somehow." Lisa grabbed a flashlight and illuminated the ancient inscriptions on the door. "Maybe these inscriptions mean something? Perhaps they will give us a clue." They began to examine the inscriptions and symbols on the door, hoping that it might lead them to a solution. However, the texts were written in ancient languages, and they couldn't decipher them. Sarah noticed one of the symbols and said, "This symbol looks like something we saw on one of the graves. Maybe they're connected?" They decided to return to the graves and study the strange symbols they had found earlier. Perhaps this would give them a key to solving the puzzle and finding a way out. On their way to the graves, they continued to hear sounds and whispers, and every step felt endlessly slow and heavy. Fear of the unknown and panic did their part, but they couldn't let it control them. As they approached the graves, they discovered that the inscriptions and symbols were part of a larger depiction on one of the tombs. The tomb was adorned with imagery intertwined with the inscriptions, and although they couldn't fully comprehend it, it appeared to be an image of something terrifying and mysterious. It was at that moment that they felt the graves beginning to tremble, and the earth beneath them quiver. The cemetery was coming to life, and they realized it wouldn't let them leave easily. The group of friends stood by the tomb with the image and inscriptions, and suddenly the graves started shaking and swaying as if they were living creatures. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and they had to struggle to keep from falling. Lisa held onto Max, and they both stared at the tomb with the image and symbols. This image seemed like a key to solving the puzzle, but they didn't know how to interpret it. Sarah screamed when her flashlight went out, leaving her in darkness. They heard the rustling of the wind and eerie voices that seemed directed at them. "We are not alone here," she whispered. Suddenly, the tomb with the image began to open, like a door leading to the unknown. It emitted strange, eerie sounds, and the group of friends realized they had to decide whether to go inside. Max was the first to resolutely enter the open tomb, followed by Lisa and Sarah. As soon as they entered, the tomb door closed behind them with an implacable force. They found themselves in a place where time and space seemed distorted. The surrounding space appeared infinite, and they had no idea where they were or how to find a way out. Fear and anxiety overwhelmed them, but they understood that they could no longer retreat. They had to keep moving forward, hoping to find the solution to the mystery of this ominous cemetery and escape from the nightmare that surrounded them. Max, Lisa, and Sarah found themselves inside a tomb that suddenly began to open before them like a door to an uncharted world. As they descended inside, they found themselves in a place that seemed to exist outside of time and space. The surrounding space was saturated with mystical forces. They could feel the earth trembling beneath their feet, and their flashlights went out, leaving them in complete darkness. There was neither an entrance nor an exit, and they remained in this forgotten world in a hopeless predicament. Lisa began to tremble with fear, but Max touched her hand and said, "We must remain calm. We need to find a way out. Somehow." Sarah started to look around, trying to discern something in the darkness. They heard eerie voices, whispers, and sounds that seemed unnatural. "We are not alone here," she said, her voice trembling. They decided to move forward because they had no other choice. They felt that time was running out, and this world could be dangerous. The surrounding space changed before their eyes, as if they were moving through a nightmare. Suddenly, they saw something strange, a distant glimmer of light. They decided to approach it, hoping to find answers and a way out. As they got closer to the source of light, they realized it was a lantern hanging above the entrance to an underground temple. The temple was filled with symbols and images that seemed familiar from their dreams and nightmares. They realized that this place had a connection to the cemetery and the mystical forces they had encountered. The group of friends decided to explore the temple, hoping that it might lead them to unravel the mystery and find salvation. They understood that they were in a dangerous and enigmatic world, and would have to delve into the secrets of this place to find a way out. Max, Lisa, and Sarah entered the underground temple, which proved to be even more mysterious than the cemetery from which they had come. The lantern illuminated a long corridor with enigmatic images and symbols on the walls. These symbols seemed ancient and unknown to them. They began to study the temple's walls, trying to decipher the meanings of the symbols, hoping that they could find the key to unraveling the entire mystery. Sarah began to examine the bas-reliefs on the walls, depicting strange creatures and events. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an image of a creature that resembled a ghostly being. "These symbols, they look like the ones we saw at the cemetery. Maybe they're connected." Max nodded and began to study the other symbols. And these symbols seem like some sort of instructions or guidance. Maybe they can tell us what to do. Lisa approached the altar at the end of the corridor. It was covered in dust and filled with mysterious energy. On the altar, she found an ancient scroll with text in an unfamiliar language. She unrolled it and began to read. This is like some kind of legend," she said, her voice full of astonishment. It's a story about spirits that dwell in this cemetery. They are connected to the temple and its mysteries. The group of friends learned that the temple had served as a place of worship for powerful forces that controlled the cemetery and summoned the spirits of the deceased. But now, these forces were lost and forgotten, and the cemetery had turned into a trap for those who dared to enter. Their research was interrupted by distant sounds. It was whispers and moans, sounding like calls, and they were getting closer. Suddenly, the temple walls began to shake, and the group of friends realized they would have to contend not only with the temple's secrets, but also with something far more terrifying that was approaching. The sounds of whispers and moans grew closer and louder. The temple's walls continued to tremble, and suddenly, before Max, Lisa, and Sarah appeared spectral figures. The cemetery spirits, which they had seen and heard at the cemetery, had become tangible and real in this temple. The spirits were shrouded in darkness and had expressionless faces. They approached the group of friends slowly and menacingly. Not a word was spoken, but their intentions were clear. The spirits were ready for a confrontation. Max, Lisa, and Sarah felt fear, but they understood that they would have to fight to survive. Max pulled out his flashlight and began to illuminate the spirits, hoping that the light could repel them. The spirits began to fade in the light, but immediately reappeared. Lisa, remembering the scroll, began to read the text she had found on the altar. Her words were in an unfamiliar language, but she believed it might help. The spirits responded to her reading, and their movements became less aggressive. Sarah attempted to approach the altar and touch the scroll, hoping it could strengthen their protection. However, when she did, the spirits began to attack her, attempting to possess her body. She screamed, and Max and Lisa rushed to her aid. The struggle with the spirits was challenging and terrifying. They were invisible and elusive, but Max, Lisa, and Sarah continued to fight, using their flashlight beams and reading the scroll to keep the spirits at bay. Finally, after a long and harrowing battle, the spirits began to disappear one by one, as if dissolving into the air. The group of friends was exhausted and frightened, but they had survived. They realized it was only a part of the mystery of this place and that they would have to learn much more and do more to find a way out and unravel the mysteries of the cemetery and the temple. After the battle with the spirits, Max, Lisa, and Sarah were drained of fear and exhaustion, but they had to continue their exploration of the temple and its mysteries. They realized that this place held the keys to unraveling the enigmas of the cemetery and the mysterious spirits. Lisa continued to read the scroll, trying to understand what other secrets it might reveal. The text described how the temple was created for the worship of powerful forces that resided within the earth. They accepted summons and oaths from those who came here. However, over time, these forces vanished into darkness and obscurity, and the temple became a place laden with fear and danger. Max examined the altar and noticed an engraving depicting a key. He understood that this key might be related to solving the temple's mysteries and finding a way out. However, they didn't know where to look for this key or how to use it. Sarah began to examine the temple walls again, paying attention to the images of spirits and events that seemed familiar to her. She concluded that these images might be some sort of prophecies or messages related to the fate of those who came here. Suddenly, they heard a strange sound resembling the creaking of a key in a lock. They turned and saw a part of the temple wall starting to move. Before them, a door opened that they hadn't noticed before. The hearts of the group of friends raced, and their attention was riveted on this door. They realized it could be their way out, but they had no idea what awaited them beyond. At that moment, they understood they had to decide whether to venture further into the unknown or stay here and attempt to find another way out of this nightmare. the lanterns on the altar suddenly extinguished, and they found themselves in darkness surrounded by the spirits. The spirits were aggressive and inscrutable, and the group of friends felt helpless against their power. They tried to fend off the attacks, using their flashlight beams and reading the scroll, but the spirits were too formidable. Max, Lisa, and Sarah were gripped by fear, and they understood that this could be the end of their story. The spirits became increasingly aggressive and closer, and it seemed like there was no escaping this battle. Sarah, clutching her flashlight, tried to create a barrier of light to repel the spirits. Her trembling voice uttered words from the scroll, hoping it would help them survive. Max pulled out a knife he had with him and attempted to strike at the spirits, but his blows passed through them as if they were mere airy figures. Lisa continued to read the scroll, but her voice was filled with fear. The spirits seemed invulnerable. Their forms shifted and vanished, and they passed through walls only to reappear before the friends. The struggle continued endlessly, and they began to feel their strength wane. With each passing minute, they sensed the darkness closing in on them, advancing to meet them. During the struggle with the spirits, Lisa suddenly stopped reading the scroll and turned off her flashlight. Max and Sarah were stunned by this sudden betrayal. Lisa, their loyal friend, had decided to explore this world of darkness and spirits on her own. "What are you doing, Lisa?" Max shouted, but she didn't respond. She vanished into the darkness, and the sounds coming from there grew fainter. Sarah, unable to believe her eyes, tried to leave the temple and find Lisa, but the door that had brought them here was locked. She knocked and called out, but received no answer. Lisa had disappeared into the darkness, and Sarah realized they wouldn't see their friend again. Max was on the verge of breaking down. He understood that he and Sarah were now alone with the spirits, and their chances of survival had become extremely slim. But he knew they had to continue the fight and search for a way out of this nightmarish situation. Alone together, Max and Sarah were overwhelmed and vulnerable to the spirits. They kept fighting, but without Lisa's support, they were outnumbered and helpless against these invisible forces. Sarah felt exhausted, and Max felt powerless. They sensed that they were losing this battle, and that they too would become a part of this dark world. They pressed forward, but they didn't know where to go or how to find a way out of this nightmarish situation. In the dark corridors of the labyrinth, strange sounds echoed, as if the moans and cries of lost souls trapped in this grim reality. Max and Sarah tried to maintain their composure, but fear and hopelessness had taken hold of them. After a prolonged struggle with the spirits, Max, Lisa, and Sarah were left drained of fear and exhaustion. They realized that with each passing minute, their hope of salvation was fading away. Max felt powerless and trapped. He clutched the knife in his hand, knowing that it wouldn't help him in this world of darkness and spirits. Lisa continued to read the scroll, but her voice was devoid of hope. Sarah, cautiously looking around, tried to understand where they were, but the darkness was so thick that she couldn't see anything. She felt fear constraining her movements, and the hope of rescue was slipping away. It was at this moment that they heard the whisper of the spirits, as if beckoning them. It was the whisper of death, and it seemed to embrace them with its cold arms. Max and Sarah realized that this world had become their prison, and they were lost in the darkness forever. They were no longer among the living, but their souls couldn't find peace. They had become part of this grim reality where death was just the beginning of a new nightmare. Many hours, or perhaps even days, passed by. Time lost its meaning in this place. The darkness continued to reign, enveloping every corner. The spirits, initially hostile, became an integral part of the new reality for our friends. Max, Lisa, and Sarah gradually became part of this dark reality. Their human features vanished, and they became ethereal. They no longer felt pain, fear, or fatigue. Their consciousness became increasingly scattered, as if dissolving into the darkness. They encountered many other souls who were also lost in this world. Many of them shared their stories of how they ended up here and what awaited them. It turned out that this graveyard was a place where souls roamed eternally, finding no rest. However, at one moment, something incredible happened. A faint light appeared in the distance. It was so bright against the all-encompassing darkness that all the souls turned their attention to it. This light was slowly approaching them, and when it was close enough, they saw that it wasn't just light. It was the figure of a person surrounded by an aura of light. When Max, Lisa, and Sarah found themselves in the well-lit room, their savior, the figure with the halo of light, disappeared, and they realized it was just a momentary illusion. They were still in the labyrinth of darkness and horror. The darkness became even denser, and the spirits returned, surrounding them from all sides. Max, Lisa, and Sarah realized that their hope of salvation had been nothing but an illusion, and their lives ended in this nightmarish reality. The spirits started closing in on them, like predators ready to tear their prey apart. Max attempted to reach for his knife again, but his hand was frozen and powerless. Lisa tried to read the scroll, but her voice was feeble. Sarah felt something cold and lifeless enveloping her, and she helplessly fell to the ground. The darkness swallowed them, and all that remained of their once friendship were their ghostly figures, forever wandering in this grim reality. The graveyard and the temple had become their eternal prison, from which there was no escape. They were forgotten, lost in the darkness, and their story became just one of the many stories confined within these walls. All that was left of them were the whispers of the wind and the ghostly figures, eternally wandering in the darkness of the graveyard and the temple.